Welcome to Reading Bear. Today we've got a story where OP returns from vacation to parents claiming ownership. Boundaries are tested, receipts appear, karma follows. I grew up with parents who believed the family rule was simple. What's yours is ours, and what's ours is still ours. They didn't say it like that out loud, but they lived it. If I bought a tool set, my father borrowed it and returned half the pieces. If I got a small bonus one year, my mother decided I owed them for all the rides they'd given me as a teenager and pushed me to pay for a weekend trip they wanted to take. When I finally scraped together enough money for a down payment on a place of my own, they treated the keys like I'd just been promoted to assistant manager in their store. Lots of advice, lots of expectations, very few boundaries. The house isn't large or fancy. It's a regular single-family house in a normal neighborhood with a small yard I try to keep neat. I saved for years, learned how to fix small things myself, and ate cheap food when the water heater died and I had to replace it. I handled the mortgage, insurance, and taxes. I made the place mine one weekend at a time. My parents hated that I drew a line they couldn't step over. They asked for a spare key the first week, in case of emergencies. I said no. They told me that was incredibly disrespectful. I said I'd share my alarm code with a neighbor I trusted, and that was that. It wasn't a fight as much as an unending drizzle of guilt and lectures. Family should be able to stop by whenever they like. A good child lets parents check on things. I still saw them. I visited on my terms. I helped them with tech stuff. I took them to appointments. But I didn't back down about the house. Keeping that line firm kept the peace better than anything else ever had. They didn't like it, but there wasn't much they could do until I took a short trip. I don't travel often. I budgeted for a low-key vacation and finally took it. A couple days in, my neighbor texted, "Moving truck at your place? Is that you?" My stomach dropped. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't hired anybody. And I'd told exactly two people I was leaving, the neighbor and my boss. I asked for a picture of the truck, mostly to make sure I wasn't imagining things. He sent one. I recognized the brand of the store my parents swear by for furniture deals. And I recognized my father's car parked behind the truck, like a chaperone. I called my parents. No answer from either of them. I sent a text. "Why is there a moving truck at my house?" 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. She opened with, "Don't you raise your voice at me," which was a great sign, considering I hadn't said a word yet. I kept it simple. "What are you doing at my house?" She went quiet for a beat, then said, "Our house. We decided we're moving in to manage things properly." I heard cabinets opening and closing in the background, then laughter that wasn't mine. "We've been talking about this for a while. You're never there. You don't entertain. You don't use the rooms properly. We're helping you." I told her to stop. I told her to leave. I told her they had no right to be there. She said, "You need to calm down and be respectful. You only have that house because we raised you and loaned you money years ago." For the record, they didn't loan me a penny for the house. They once gave me a small emergency loan for a car repair back when I was fresh out of school, which I paid back in full. Somehow, in their minds, that plus raising me converted into a lifetime lien on anything I own. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. I called the neighbor again. He said they were carrying boxes in like they planned to stay. He couldn't see the locks, but he heard the sound of a drill. I suddenly pictured my front door hardware in pieces. I thought about calling the police. I didn't, partly because I was a few hours away and partly because I knew how these things often go when it's family and there's no immediate danger. I also knew my parents would tell the officer some version of, "We're here to help and we're family," and it could easily turn into civil matter, sort it out yourselves unless I was on scene. I took a breath and did what I always do when things go sideways. I opened a notes app and made a list. First, proof. I already had digital copies of my deed, mortgage statements, insurance, and property tax receipts. I keep boring paperwork organized on purpose because people don't argue with boring paperwork. Second, I needed to shut down the idea that my parents had any permission to be there. In a lot of places, if you let someone stay in your home and then change your mind, you expose yourself to weird tenant issues. I had not invited them. I needed to keep it that way on paper and in reality. I texted both of them. "You do not have permission to be in my house. You are not owners or tenants. Leave." My mother responded with a 2-paragraph message about how ungrateful I am, how I make them worry, and how they are exercising their right as parents to ensure the house is maintained correctly. She ended with, "Do not call the police on your family. We will handle this within the family. Mail your keys and garage opener to the address. You are not to set foot on this property until you've calmed down and can talk like an adult." That last part clicked something in my brain. They had given me a direct order. It was ridiculous and manipulative, and it gave me exactly the wording I didn't even know I needed. Malicious compliance depends on taking someone's demand at face value and leaning on it until it breaks. Their demand was threefold: don't involve outsiders, mail the keys, stay away. I wasn't going to risk my credit or my safety to satisfy them, but I could comply in a way that documented everything and turned their own words into a lever. I wrote a short letter. Dry, formal, no drama. The heading said, "Notice of Revocation of License and Demand to Vacate." In it, I stated simply that any implied permission to enter or remain in the home was revoked, effective immediately. I attached a copy of the deed showing I am the sole owner. I included a deadline for them to leave and a line stating that failure to leave would constitute trespass after notice. I added a second document titled Courtesy License to Occupy, good for 48 hours from the time they received it, solely to avoid someone later claiming I hadn't been reasonable. The license made it plain that no tenancy was being created, and they had no right to remain beyond the window. The point was to introduce a clear paper trail. I told them to go. I gave them a reasonable time to gather their things. If they didn't, I had their written demand and my written notice to show an officer. I printed the paperwork at a shop near where I was staying. Then I bought a small padded envelope and enclosed exactly what my mother demanded: a key. Specifically, I included an old backdoor key from a lock I had replaced the year I moved in. It didn't work anymore, but it was, technically, a house key that had at one point been to the property. I wasn't about to give them a working key to commit more damage. I mailed the entire packet to my house by certified mail with adult signature required, and to their apartment the same way. Malicious compliance step 1. They asked me to mail the keys and not show up. I was following their instruction in the most verifiable way possible, while also serving formal notice. Then I sent a short email to the HOA with copies to the property manager. I am out of town and did not authorize anyone to occupy my home. If any notices are needed, please address them to occupant and copy me here. I will address any violations upon return. I knew my parents can't handle HOA letters without melting down. They treat rules as personal insults. They wanted to manage the property? Great. The HOA can talk to the occupant while I collect a neat little pile of envelopes with dates on them. I also called my homeowner's insurance and asked them to note the file that there were unauthorized occupants who had entered without permission and that I had delivered a revocation letter. The agent suggested a non-emergency police report when I got back and said to call if I found damage. I changed nothing else about the policy. I turned off smart thermostat access and paused the Wi-Fi guest network from the provider's app because I pay for both. Over the next day, my phone lit up with messages from my mother. Everything from "we're doing you a favor" to "you better not cancel anything we need." Then she sent a picture of herself sitting in my living room chair like a queen on a throne. I didn't reply. A few hours later, I saw the first delivery confirmation on the certified mail, then the second. The green electronic receipts were small and boring and exactly what I needed. They had signed for both packets. The clock started. I drove back the next morning. I didn't go to the house. I went to the police station with a folder. I told the desk officer I needed advice on a civil standby. I explained calmly, "I am the owner. My parents entered without permission. I gave them written notice and a reasonable deadline. Here's proof they received it. Here's my deed. Here are my mortgage and tax receipts. Here's the HOA email where I state there are unauthorized occupants." I wasn't crying or yelling. I was the most boring person in the room. The officer flipped through the papers and said, "Good documentation. We scheduled a time for a civil standby later that afternoon." He reminded me they might call it a civil matter, but the revocation letter and notice would help. I arrived with the officer and a locksmith. The officer knocked, announced, and my father opened the door. He smiled like he'd won something. He then saw me and let his face harden. "You were told not to come here." The officer asked both of them for identification and proof they lived there. They handed over IDs with their apartment address and nothing else. My mother started in with, "We are the owners," waving an arm at the living room like a game show host. The officer asked for proof of ownership. She gestured at the room again, as if furniture proved a deed. I handed over my folder. The officer scanned the deed first, then the certified mail receipts, then the revocation letter. The officer asked my mother if the signature on the mail receipt was hers. She said yes. He asked if she had any document, any at all, showing they owned the house, paid the mortgage, or were tenants. She said, "We're his parents." He looked at me, then back at them and said, as evenly as a person can speak, "Being the parent of an adult does not make you the owner of their property." My mother switched tactics to outrage. "He can't kick us out. That's illegal. He's abandoning the house. We're protecting it. We told him to mail the keys, and he did." At that, the officer actually turned to me and raised an eyebrow. I said, "I mailed them exactly what they asked for, along with the formal notice you're holding." The officer's mouth twitched like he wanted to smile, and didn't. He told my parents they needed to gather their things and leave immediately. He explained he would wait while they packed essentials and that any further dispute would need to be handled in civil court. He also told them that if they refused or returned after being told not to, they would be trespassing after notice, and he could act on that. They balked. They stalled. They accused me of humiliating them. The officer didn't take the bait. He just repeated the instructions, calm and steady. After 30 minutes of clattering and complaining, they stepped out with a couple suitcases each and a box labeled kitchen stuff in my handwriting, which they'd apparently decided now belonged to them by virtue of touching it. The officer told them, "If any property belongs to you and remains here, you may schedule a pickup through." The officer gave his name and a non-emergency number. "Do not return without an appointment." The locksmith changed the locks. I signed a receipt. When I stepped back into my living room, I expected to feel relief. I felt tired. The house looked wrong. The furniture had been rearranged. My bed had new sheets I didn't buy. There was food I don't eat in the fridge. And the smell my parents love, a certain heavy cleaner that leaves a sharp, artificial lemon in the air. I opened windows and started the boring process of taking pictures of everything. I found damage, small but infuriating. The drilled-out strike plate on the back door, a missing shoebox where I keep important receipts, my tool chest sitting half open with wrenches in piles, a framed print leaning against the wall with fresh scratches on the glass, a suitcase of theirs shoved in my hall closet, like they were planning to stay long-term. I documented it all. I emailed the insurance agent to start a file and asked whether any of it rose to the level of a claim. It didn't. Then I did what I do best, more paperwork. I wrote a short letter to my parents stating that anything they had left behind would be considered abandoned if not retrieved within a specific window, that all pickups must be scheduled through the non-emergency number, and that any further entry without appointment would be trespass after notice. I sent it certified again. I copied the officer. Boring, formal, relentless. The next week, the HOA sent 3 notices addressed to occupant about trash bins left at the curb and a car partially blocking a fire lane. I didn't move the bins. I was out of town, remember? My parents had left them, and they got the pleasure of learning how HOAs communicate when they think an owner is ignoring rules. They called me annoyed and shouted that I was sick for involving strangers. I told them to direct any further comments in writing to my email, and that all calls about the house should go through the non-emergency line. If they wanted to play property owner, they could experience the owner mail pile. I scanned and forwarded the notices to them. Malicious compliance step 2, treating their claim of ownership like a mailing list subscription they couldn't cancel. They refused to schedule a pickup for their remaining stuff because family doesn't need appointments. They tried to show up 2 days later anyway. The neighbor texted again. "Your dad is back," pounding on the door. I called the non-emergency number and gave the case info and the officer's name. It took all of 8 minutes for a patrol car to roll up. The officer who arrived looked at my father's ID, looked at his notes, and said, "You've been warned. Are you here for a scheduled pickup?" My father argued. The officer repeated the question. He said no. They cited him for trespass after warning and told him to leave. He called me a traitor to my face as he backed down the walkway. The argument ran through extended family like a brush fire. I got long messages from relatives telling me I needed to respect the older generation and how, in our culture, parents have a stake in their children's homes. I replied with 2 screenshots, one of my deed and one of the revocation letter with their signatures on the receipt highlighted. I said, "I'm happy to discuss culture. I'm not discussing paperwork. I've already resolved." Several people apologized. Others sent question marks and then stayed out of it. My parents posted a vague rant online about ungrateful children. I ignored it. I filed a small claim suit for the damage, not for a big number. I itemized the locksmith invoice, the broken strike plate and hardware replacement, the damaged frame, and a day of lost wages for the civil standby. I attached photos, receipts, and the police case number. It wasn't about money as much as getting an official piece of paper that said, in a sober, courtish way, "You can't do this." They showed up and tried the "we're parents" line. The judge asked a single question. "Are you on the deed?" They said no. The judge awarded me the amount, plus the filing fee. It wasn't a life-changing sum. It was a boundary printed on a different kind of paper. They eventually scheduled a pickup. I put their remaining things in labeled boxes and made an inventory list with a photo of each box. The officer stood by while they loaded their car. My mother cried and tried to make a scene. It didn't work because scenes need an audience, and I wasn't giving them one. When they were gone, I locked the door and sat on the floor and practiced breathing until I didn't feel like bursting into tears or shaking something. A week later, I met with a therapist. I told someone neutral that my parents think everything I own is a family resource. The therapist said something so simple it should have been obvious. It's okay to make a choice they don't like and stick to it. The problem isn't your boundary. The problem is their refusal to accept it. We talked through a plan for limited contact and what phrases I could use to shut down arguments. I wrote them out on an index card and kept it in my wallet. I also made the house mine again, in practical ways. I moved the furniture back. I replaced the sheets with ones that didn't smell like fake lemon. I installed a better deadbolt and a security latch inside the door, the kind you can use when you're home. I put a small safe in the closet for documents and jewelry. I added a camera pointed at the front porch purely to capture the door and walkway in case of package theft. No microphones, nothing pointed at the street or neighbors, just enough to document if someone tried the handle. I gave a single key to the neighbor who'd texted me, along with a thanks gift card, and a promise that if he ever needed help moving something heavy, I was his person. My parents tried one more time to restart the argument by sending me a letter through an attorney friend of theirs. It wasn't a real demand letter. It was a badly written, puffed-up thing that made vague threats about rights as parents. I forwarded it to a local attorney and asked if I needed to respond. The attorney, a professional, not a friend, wrote a concise reply. Owner is sole name on title. Your clients were notified to vacate. Your clients were removed by police after refusing. Any further interference will result in a restraining order. It cost me a couple $100 and was worth every cent for the quiet that followed. Over the months after, the temperature in the family group chat dropped. I removed myself from the chat and told them to email me for anything serious. My parents adjusted by pretending I didn't exist at family dinners I didn't attend. We exchanged a couple short emails about holidays. They didn't apologize. They didn't admit what they did was wrong, but they stopped trying to walk into my house like it was theirs. Friends asked how I handled it without losing my mind. I told them the truth. I wrote boring letters. I kept receipts. I treated my home like a piece of property instead of an emotional bargaining chip. I let my parents talk themselves into the corner of their choosing, and then I let their own words put up the fence. The malicious compliance part still makes me laugh when I think about it. They demanded I mail the keys and not involve outsiders. So I mailed them a key that opened nothing exactly what they asked for and served them notice with the same envelope. They demanded I keep it within the family. So I used the family rules in writing and let a uniformed stranger enforce them when they refused to follow them. They insisted they were the owners. I gave them the part of ownership they never want. OA letters, bills, documentation, and responsibility. They wanted the comfort of control with none of the paperwork. Paperwork, 1. There were a dozen small choices where I could have escalated in anger. Instead, I made the choices that would read well if a judge had to read them. If anyone is in a similar mess, make your list and be dull. Deed, mortgage, taxes, notice, receipts. Document every ridiculous thing the other side says, especially the parts that trap them. And if they demand something you can safely and literally provide in a way that doesn't harm you, give it to them, neatly labeled, certified mail, return receipt, requested. I don't keep the certified mail slips on the fridge like trophies, but I did scan them into a folder labeled House Legal. I hope I never need them again. On quiet evenings when I water the plants and hear the small sounds of my home settling, I think about how hard it was to draw that line and how necessary it turned out to be. A home isn't a symbol or a power struggle. It's 4 walls and a roof you pay for, maintain, and protect. It's also a boundary with a physical address. The last time my father mentioned the house, it was through a relative who prefaced everything with "Don't shoot the messenger." He'd told them I'd overreacted and made him look bad by bringing the police into a private matter. The relative asked what I wanted them to say back. I told them, "Tell him I did exactly what he asked. He told me to mail the keys and not show up. I mailed the keys. I didn't show up. The rest is what happens when you knock down a door and claim you own a place you don't." The messenger laughed, said they wish they could be there to see my father's face when he heard that, and the conversation moved on to something normal. Normal is good. Normal is grocery lists and laundry, and repairing a little nick in the wall without asking permission or justifying why I care about paint. Normal is not worrying that a moving truck will appear without my say-so. Normal is locking my door and knowing the only person who has the key is me and the neighbor I trust. I won't pretend there's a happy bow on this with a big family reconciliation. That's not how real life works most of the time. What I got is better, a clear result. I kept my house. I kept my boundary. They learned that "we're your parents" is not a legal document. If they ever try again, I have a file thicker than a cookbook that says exactly what happens next. If you've never had to become the most boring person in the room to protect yourself, I hope you never do. But if you do, embrace it. Boring wins. Receipts win. Certified mail wins. And when someone who thinks they control you tries to turn your home into a stage for their authority, the most satisfying response is turning off the lights, shutting the door, and letting the paperwork do the talking. After the dust settled, I changed one more thing. On my phone, I set a custom text tone for my neighbor. It's not fancy, just a short, clear sound that makes me look up. If it plays, I look. If it doesn't, I'm watering plants, or cooking dinner, or reading a book, and the rest of the world can knock on their own doors. I haven't taken another vacation yet. I will. But next time I'll put 2 extra pieces of paper in the folder on my kitchen counter before I leave. 1 copy of the revocation of license letter and 1 copy of the deed. If something goes sideways, I won't have to reinvent my plan. I'll do exactly what worked. Comply with the ridiculous request in the most literal, documented way possible and let the consequences land where they belong. Meanwhile, the house is quiet. Mine. In the simple way, a thing becomes yours when you pay for it and protect it and refuse to be bullied out of it. My parents can tell whatever story they need to tell to save face. Paper doesn't care about stories. Paper cares about names and signatures and who signed for which envelope. They wanted the last word. The last word was delivered by certified mail. Adult signature required. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.